The KRGS Doors Show, proudly brought to you by KRGS Doors. For all your shopfront roller shutters, roller grills, folding closures and bifold doors, visit www.krgsdoors.com.au. Welcome to the KRGS Doors Podcast. I'm your host, Drew Blackman. The aim of our podcast is to talk to cool people with cool stories, whether it be our suppliers, customers, staff, other business owners, or people from different walks of life, and get to know them a bit better. If you're interested in coming on, drop us a line or email, or connect with us via Facebook, and we can have a chat to see what we can do. Today on episode 44 of the 2-year-old KRGS Doors podcast, I'm joined by KRGS Doors Managing Director Clayton Blackman, and we talk to Jaimee Rogers, media personality both on TV and radio, and English channel finisher who raised over $60,000 for Gotcha for Life charity. I'll also let you in on our next episode's guest, but for now, please welcome to the podcast, Miss Jaimee Rogers.
If this doesn't turn you on, folks, you haven't got a switch.
Jaimee, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast today. What is the Jaimee Rogers story?
Well, thanks for having me, Drew and Clayton. Gee, the Jaimee Rogers story, that's a big question. Well, I was born in the US, if you want to go right back to the start, and then moved here when I was 8. And lived in Sydney, just recently moved to Victoria. My entire life has revolved around sport in some capacity, whether that was competing in swimming. I was heavily into water polo, netball. I was one of those kids that was always outside doing some form of sport. And then also my family also loved watching sport. So we were all heavily involved in some way. Swimming ended up becoming a really big part of my life. I wasn't, especially when I was sort of in primary school and early years of high school, like the academic side of it wasn't something that I overly enjoyed.
Don't we all? Isn't that the case for all of us?
No, exactly. Wasn't to my strong point, and I ended up changing schools and it flipped around after that. But in those early years in particular, swimming was something that I was good at. And so when you're not enjoying schoolwork, but you're good at something, you sort of continue to do it and thrive in that space.
That's right.
Really, yeah. And that's what I think I love about sports so much, is because it really allows people to be who they are, and you can go and succeed in something and feel really special and a part of a different community. And that was swimming for me. So right from when I was in year 5 was when I started to win a lot of races and realize, okay, actually I am pretty good at this and I love it. And so I was starting to swim year 5. It was about 6 or 7 times a week.
Wow.
And then, yeah, so you start pretty young going quite full on. And the rule in our house was, so my parents, like whilst they love sport, they weren't even the slightest bit pushy parents. So if I wanted to go to anything, and it was the same with my brothers, but in particular with me with swimming, because my mum had to wake up at 4:15 in the morning with me to take me. So the rule was, if I wanted to go, I had to set the alarm and get ready and then go wake her up, and then we would go to swimming. So if I slept through, it meant that I wouldn't go, and you'd often get into trouble if you'd miss a swimming session. And then once I got to sort of year 7 was when I was training like 9 times a week. So your whole life really revolves around.
At swimming. 14 type of years old, training 9 times a week.
13, yeah.
Wow.
And so, yeah, and it was great. You know, I went to nationals, and when I was in year 9 was when it was the Olympic trials and got to go to that. And, you know, when I was at World Short Course Nationals, I mean, all that sort of stuff is just such a great experience for a young kid. You know, I'm on the pool decks with the Ian Thorpes and the Kieran Perkins and Michael Klim, who I was obsessed with at the time. And yeah, and it was amazing. So that was a huge chunk of my life. And I ended up swapping schools to go to a new one in year 10. And luckily with that school, it was a sports school, but also really good at the academia side. So I ended up doing really well school-wise. So then when I left, it was funny because in New South Wales at the time, you would look through the UAC guide to sort of get an idea of what you wanted to do for uni. And my mum and I literally went through the UAC guide, and my mum said, "Oh, look, that degree has sport in it. You like sport, so just enroll for that one." And I did. So that ended up being a sport and exercise management degree, which is like a combination of predominantly it's sports science. And it was great. But when I finished that, I didn't really want to go work in the sports science space. So I went on and did a Masters of Marketing. And when I was doing my master's is when I started working at the racetrack, and that was at the AJC at the time. And I always loved racing. My grandparents were they owned racehorses, and my parents didn't like racing, and they're still not particularly interested in it. But I think, you know, when they always say racing's in your blood, I think it certainly is in my case, because it
just skipped a generation. That's all, Jaimee. Is that right?
And that's what I think happened. And I'm very conscious of that, because my dad has said that he hated racing because he associated it with every Saturday. He'd be there dressed in a suit, sitting in the members stand, watching his dad's horses.
How good is that? How good is that? What else would you want in life? How good is that?
Well, and that's what I always say that, because I would go to phase, like, I take my kids all the time, and they're always watching Sky Racing. And when I'm doing my form and they're sitting next to me, they'll often be watching the races too, and they pick out which horse that they think is going to win from where it currently is in the run and stuff like that. So I'm always very conscious, though, that I don't want them to turn into my dad, where they don't like horse racing. But they seem to love it, which is great, because I've got a few horses. So they're young, my kids, but they think that every time there's a horse race that my horses are running. So it's really funny. But yeah, so my first job out of uni was working in racing, and I think it was great, because I always liked racing. But when you actually go and work in it, you see so many different facets to it. You know, whether that is I used to sit in the mounting yard with trainers and jockeys on a Wednesday at Warwick Farm, where there'd be more bins than people. So you would be able to, so you'd be able to really pick the brains of those that were around me. And the late Guy Walter was one of them that was just so forthcoming with their knowledge, and they would literally just sit there and just talk to me. And, you know, I'd sit there with the vets and can learn a lot from them. And
you just had to be like a sponge, just to take in all the information.
Exactly. And that's what I really liked about it. I was really lucky. I was only there for 18 months before moving on to the tab, but it was a really good time, because that's where I really learned a lot about racing, more than just being a race goer. I actually learned every single element to what went into the industry, because it's an enormous industry. It's something like the third largest employer in this country. So there's a lot to it. And I was lucky that I could really learn it all from some of the best minds in the business.
Yeah, so probably a bit of background with Jaimee. Everyone's possibly seen Jaimee, or I would hope, on the TV or listen to it on radio and so forth, with obviously working for the TAB, New South Wales. And you've been on Sky Sports Radio and so forth. So that's obviously the background and the crossover with Jaimee being on those two medias. Just quickly going back, what part of the US were you from, or were you born, Jaimee?
So I was born in Michigan, of all places, in snowy Michigan.
I was going to say, you couldn't get any colder, could you?
Yeah, no. And I was born in February, so there's photos of my mum, like heavily pregnant, shoveling the snow to be able to just get the car out of the garage. And then when I was 1, we moved to LA, and that was where my 2 younger brothers were born.
Yeah.
And then we lived there until we moved back here. My parents are Australian, so they moved over there for my dad's work, and then that's where.
Do you like going back? You like going back visiting?
I've only gone back a few times to visit. I haven't actually gone back as much as I would have liked to. I wish I'd worked over there. That's probably a regret that I have in life. But, I've gone over there for a few holidays. I'm going back at the end of the year. I'm going to do the Honolulu Marathon. It's a great place.
Yeah, it is. And what's obviously mainly in New South Wales, but what's taken you down to Victoria?
So work has taken me down to Victoria. So the past few years, I've been reading the news on the Big Sports Breakfast, which is on Sky Sports Radio that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
And we just sort of had a few changes in the Victorian media space, and work has moved me down here to purely focus on the media in this state. So I still pop back up to Sydney quite a bit and do a few things here and there, but it's very much predominantly doing the media here. A lot with RSN, so I'm sure you've listened to RSN. And
yes.
Anyone that likes their racing tunes into RSN, so I do quite a lot with them. But I've gone back into that tab space.
So the whole family's moved down to Victoria now?
Whole family. My husband is Victorian, so he was very happy he was pretty much sprinting across the border to get back down here. and then I've got two little kids. So Hudson, who's 5, has just started in primary school, and Archer is 3, and he's just in a local daycare. And yeah, they're both enjoying themselves here, and it's a great place. It's cold, but it's a great place.
Compared to Michigan, no, it's like summer.
Yeah, that's true.
So with that background, and you mentioned just sitting at the racetrack on a Wednesday, that obviously would now help you in your role of just understanding the vet and the strapper and the trainer and everything that goes into it would certainly help in your current role in the media on racing.
Yeah, and it's what gave me a really good head start because I'm a tipster down here in Victoria, and I feel like it's when you learn the real ins and outs of racing, it certainly helps when you're trying to identify a winner in a race. But yeah, just sitting with, in particular, the vets. And I remember just saying to one of them, do the horses even know that they're racing? And I remember the vet looking at me, and she actually said, yeah, if you look closely at a photo finish, you'll see that a horse will be practically breaking its neck to be just that little bit over, because they know that they're down to the final few, and that might be the last thing that gets them over. And about how much they love it and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, and sitting with trainers like Gay Waterhouse, and when they're quiet, they've got the time to sit there and explain what sort of tactics they've done and why they've done it. And jockeys, when they jump off their ride, and you can listen to them talking to the trainer as to what went wrong or what went well. And it's all stuff that helps with working in racing. I mean, I've now worked, and I was saying to a friend, it's almost sort of getting close to 20 years.
Wow.
You must have started when you were about 6.
I wish.
Just doubling back there, you mentioned about your swimming career, and I believe you're fairly close going to the Olympics for swimming. How close were you, and what age and things like that?
Well, I was 15 when it was the Olympic trials for the Sydney 2000 Olympics. And at the time, so I made it to the trials. I had a broken foot at the time the trials were on. I'd broken it just before nationals leading into that period. I literally fell there was a little gutter. It was literally that high. It was the smallest gutter, and I just completely rolled my foot and snapped the bone on the side. So I had a broken foot, but I don't think, I would never have actually made it. Getting to Olympic trials was the furthest I would have gone, because I was in that era of Liesl Jones and Samantha Riley, and I had an amazing cohort of swimmers during that period. Don't get me wrong, they're great now as well, but it was just such a strong field. So I would never have beaten the Liesl Jones or Samantha Rileys, but it was very cool to be amongst all of them during that time.
We were blessed with the amount of talent that we had at that time, weren't we? Both in the male and female.
Absolutely. It was just sensational. So I was lucky to be a part of it.
Absolutely.
And obviously swimming has been in your heart for a long time, and as you said, you're really good at it, so it's something that you do, and I guess that's like anything. If you're good at it, you continue on. Just recently you swam the English Channel just for the sake of it, because you can.
Just for kicks.
Yeah, just for fun.
Like everyone does.
I guess you don't wake up one morning and go, hey, guess what? I might swim the English Channel.
Yeah, I might roll out of bed and swim the English Channel today.
How did that whole thing come along, and then what was that process and your training? Like we do follow you on social, so it was every second day or every day we've seen update you're in the pool or swimming. What was that all about?
Yeah, so it actually all came about because at the time when I was working on the Big Sports Breakfast, I'd been updating all the listeners about a girl called Chloe McArdle, and she at the time was trying to break the men's record for the amount of channel crossings, which was 37, and she's now gone on to hold the world record of 44. But I was doing every single day I was updating, because she was trying to do, I think from memory, it was about 7 over a 2-week period. And so literally every day I felt like I was talking about it. Anyway, I came home from work one day, and it was actually my husband that said to me, you're so obsessed with this Chloe girl, why don't you go and swim the English Channel? And my first response was, no, I could not think of anything worse. That looks horrific. I've seen the videos of her at the end, and she looks terrible. And I was like, oh, no, thanks. But with me, when something like that, an idea gets planted or you start to think about it, I thought, well, actually,
I'm going to take this on.
Yeah. Well, I thought this this actually could be really cool. Like, I like swimming, but I had no idea what was then ahead of me. So I ended up booking in with a pilot, which is a 2-year wait list, and it's probably about 3 or 4 years now because of COVID, but it was 2-year wait. And I remember even saying to Laurie Daly, like, oh, it's such a long time. How do you stay motivated for 2 years on a goal that seems so far away? And I had booked in for these like little mini goals that were supposed to keep me going throughout those 2 years, but every single one of them got cancelled, whether it was because of COVID, weather, so many different obstacles came along the way. But it was seriously the best thing I've ever done. It was just,
it's a great achievement.
The people that you meet, the people that you meet along the way, and just the experience. My whole life revolved around it. My family's life revolved around it. My work revolved around it. Everything was dedicated to that swim, and it was 2 years of training 6 times a week. I was in the pool 5 times. I was doing personal training 2 times a week. I was doing Pilates. I was seeing a physio every fortnight just to make sure that I wouldn't get any injuries. So everything, and every Saturday I'd be out swimming between 6 hours, sometimes 8 hours, sometimes 5 hours, just depending on what my swimming coach had put into place. So it was just all-consuming, but so incredible at the same time.
Well, I must say, out of all the guests we've had on the KRGS Doors podcast, you're the first one that's on the English channel.
Oh, there you go.
Congratulations. I'm flat out doing a lap of the bath, let alone swimming the bloody English channel. How long did it take you, Jaimee? What was the time?
It was 12 and a half hours.
Wow. And talk us through it. What goes through your head for 12 and a half hours when you're swimming the English channel?
Yeah, it's funny because people used to ask me when I would do my Saturday swims and I would be out there for 8 hours or 6 hours, and people would say, what do you think about during that time? Because it's such a long period to just be in your own thoughts. And it's funny, like, I was never bored. You never look at your watch and think, oh, I've only been out here for 3 hours, I've got 5 to go. I mean, I had a few sessions where it was super cold and I hated it, but most of the time when you're swimming, you're almost like it's meditating, because you drift off into different worlds. It sounds crazy, but there's no distractions with swimming. So it's just a really nice, peaceful time. Swimming the channel, though, when you're doing for 12 and a half hours. So my swimming coach had said to my friend that I'm not allowed to know how long I've been in the water, and I'm not allowed to know how long I've got to go.
Yeah.
So what I was doing, though, is every 30 minutes is when you would stop for a quick feed. My friend would throw a water bottle out to me and I'd quickly have something, and then I'd continue on. So I was counting those feeds. So I thought I was really clever because I was able to figure out how long I'd been in there. But so that I wouldn't forget, I was saying the time over and over and over again in my head. So if like that whole half an hour break, I'd be like 1 hour, 2 hours, whatever I was up to. And so that I wouldn't forget. So I literally was just counting the entire time. And every now and then I'd sort of drift off and sing, or I'd be talking to myself, or especially towards the end when it was getting really tough and my shoulder had given way and I was talking a lot to myself. But otherwise I was just, for most of that, just thinking that I was being really smart and counting my feeds, so I knew how long I'd been in the water for.
So swimming is obviously an individual sport, but to go and swim the English Channel, you must have had a team support behind you. Like how many people did you take across behind the scenes to help out?
So I just had 2 friends. Sarah, who had come out on a lot of my training swims with me. So she was the one that Vlad, who's my swimming coach, had shown her different things. And then another friend of mine, Corey, was also there to help prepare all of the different food, throw them out, because it turned out Sarah ended up getting really bad seasickness. So she was really sick the whole time because the water was really choppy. So Corey was kind of in charge of getting all of those things running. But to Sarah's credit, she was vomiting and so sick, but every time I'd stop, she'd be there all waving and happy. So I had no idea that she wasn't well. So it was just the 3 of us went over. And then on the boat, we also had my pilot, and he had 2 other people, because they have to rotate every hour, I think it was, throughout the swim. And then they'd just be talking to my friends about what they needed to yell out to me. And so there was mainly just my 2 friends, really, and my whole family stayed behind. just because my kids were young and
Yeah.
you're over there for 2 weeks and you don't know when you're going to swim. So we just thought it would be too hard to bring them over and just wait.
Yeah,
with them. It was a minimal crew, but they did the job.
Good effort.
So are you booked in on a certain day that no matter what the conditions are, you're jumping in the water, or is it, we could go today, hang on, let's check?
So that's half the reason why it's called the Channel Coaster, because you ride the roller coaster of, am I going, am I not, am I going? So I was pretty lucky in that I knew it was always going to be a challenge of mine because I always like things very planned and prepared. I don't like that unknown of, am I going to swim tomorrow or not? So I was pretty lucky because at the time that I went over was when the UK was having that heat wave. So the weather had been quite nice. The winds were quite high, but I knew on Tuesday, my pilot said to me on Tuesday, you are looking like you will go Saturday. And that's really rare. You don't normally get
an idea that you're going.
That.
Yeah.
You normally have none. So you could wake up. So I had to wake up at midnight to get ready to go for my swim. I started at 3 a.m. and I could wake up at midnight and my pilot would ring me and say, go back to bed, you're not swimming. And that happened with some of my other friends who'd been training for the channel, and that lasted for 2 weeks, and then you can miss your window and not swim. So it's actually that's a really tough part of the channel. So I found that I was pretty lucky in that sense. My conditions were pretty tough on the day, but that was unexpectedly tough. They didn't expect the wind to have picked up as much as it did, so it was super choppy. But I went on the day that they thought that I would.
And then after 12 and a half hours, what's that feeling like actually touching the sand or walking out, or staggering out possibly? What's that feeling like?
So for me, it was very so for the last 3 hours, my shoulder had just decided it didn't want to work anymore. It was so excruciating every single stroke for that last 3 hours. Like it felt like a knife was being stabbed into my shoulder on every single stroke. And throughout my training, my shoulders have never caused an issue. I've never had shoulder problems. So this was a really big surprise. So to get to that end, because I had to keep telling myself that, a shoulder surgeon, you've got a great physio, just keep going until you get to the end. And when you finish in France, you either finish on the beach and you can get out and walk along the beach, and there's often a lot of locals there to take photos and meet swimmers, and but that wasn't the case for me. I pretty much washed up on rocks. So I had to go. It was this really remote point of the south of France. It was like it's very remote. You couldn't have gotten a more obscure spot. So I had to go and climb out over rocks. And so I didn't really have that moment of letting it all soak in. It was very much like, oh my God, let me just find that rock, climb out, arms up, which officially means that you're finished. And then I was straight back to the boat to go back to the UK, which is about 2.5 hours. So I didn't have that moment of, oh my God, it was more just
to take
my shoulder is so sore. Yeah. I have to stop, climb up on the rocks, arms up. Okay, let's go.
So question.
Very cool, though.
So the best question is, when are you going again?
Well, I was just about to mention Chloe McCardle, who you mentioned earlier. She's now done it 44 times. So you've only got 43 to go to match her. So when's the next one?
Yes. Yeah, so I'm not going to do another channel. It's actually a really boring swim, the English Channel. There's really nothing to look at because, you're going between two countries. So it's just very open ocean. Whereas like when you're swimming in Australia, there's so much to look at and so much marine life and beautiful coastlines and things like that. Whereas the English Channel, there's heaps of tankers that you're swimming with, but there's not a lot to look at. So I wouldn't be doing that one again. I'd rather do a different long swim.
You're looking for something that's got a better scenery. I don't
Bondi to New Zealand or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yes. Well, in New Zealand, they do have one of the Ocean Sevens, so I could potentially do that and start ticking those off.
Melbourne to Hobart or something like that.
Yeah.
Across the Spirit of Tasmania.
Yeah, exactly.
Race it.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned, is it the Hawaiian Iron Woman or Iron Person you're doing later on in the year?
Not quite. It's the Honolulu Marathon.
Okay.
So not quite the Ironman levels, but just the marathon. And it's funny because I had that moment of, do you reckon can I actually run a marathon? And I thought, you just swam between two countries. Of course you can go and run a marathon. So that's what I'm going to do.
So 42 Ks.
Yeah.
Wow.
42
How many
Ks.
kilometres is the swim? English Channel, how many Ks?
Well, it's 35 in a straight line, but it's usually about 50 because
You can see I've done my homework here, can't you? I've really put time and effort into it. So 35 Ks on the swim, and this time's 42. So I can see a triathlon coming on here soon. I can just see the jigsaw pieces coming together.
I've had a few people reach out and say, come and do some Ironman or come and do some training with us. And maybe. We'll see.
You might have heard it here first.
Yes, we might.
KRGS podcast.
We might be breaking a story here. Yeah.
So 42K, you obviously started training for that already?
Yes. Yep, I've started training for that because it actually forced me to, because I live in Melbourne now where access to beaches is not quite the same as when I lived in Sydney. So I need to start doing a bit more land activity. So I am training for the marathon now.
So what's your training program look like for that?
So it's nowhere near as extensive as what the English Channel training is. So at the moment, I do have a running coach and I run twice a week, but then I actually go to a gym called BFT 4 times a week. So that's it at the moment. 4 gym sessions and 2 runs. It feels very luxurious in comparison to the channel. Compared
to getting up early morning going for a swim.
And is your husband running with you, or is he just a supporter on this one?
He will start doing some running for this one. He'll probably do the marathon as well. That was kind of also the idea, is this one's a bit more of a family-friendly goal. So if the kids will come to Honolulu this time and we'll be there at the finish line. And yeah, Dave will hopefully, he got some new shoes for his birthday, so he doesn't really have an excuse to run.
I could really seriously think of better family fun activities to do than running 42 kilometres.
That's right up my alley. Don't know about my husband, but that's
I think he's going to be talked into it.
Yes. I don't think he's got a choice somehow.
No, exactly right.
Just back now to your media career. You obviously in sport and horses and that type of thing, was there any other avenue you're looking for to go into media? Is it something that, whether it's the news or whatnot, on that side of things?
I worked in the news space for a little while, and I don't think it was really for me. I enjoyed it on the Big Sports Breakfast, but I have worked in the Channel 7 newsroom. So while I was at Tabcorp, I actually went and was working freelance at Channel 7 and Channel 10 so that I could get that experience in the newsroom and see if that was something that I enjoyed doing. And so I'd be out there at the press conferences asking the questions, and that was great. It was an awesome experience, and it certainly helped in my next job on the Big Sports Breakfast. But I don't think that's the space that I necessarily want to be in. I enjoy live sports, so whether that's, sideline or something else, or who knows, something completely, totally different might be on the cards.
Jaimee has worked, has hosted and has also been on the Big Sports Breakfast on 2KY for many, many years, and it is one of the great radio shows that it's had some fantastic hosts along the way, the likes of Terry Kennedy and Michael Slater, and it's got Laurie Daly now, and obviously Michael Clark. But it's a really fun institution there of sports. And my favourite was when they had Terry Kennedy and Richard Friedman.
Yeah. Well, you said that you've been listening for a long time, and
been an avid listener.
Richard Friedman is one of the people that I put into that bucket of teaching me a lot. Richard has been great. He's actually worked alongside me for a lot of my career in terms of when I started at the AJC. Richard was the general manager of racing, and then we both went to Sky Racing at the same time. He's obviously now gone back into the training sphere and working with Seven, but he is also someone that has always been so good with his knowledge and teaching me so much of what he knew. He used to take me to track work. So when he was back training, this was only just recently, I'd go out to track work with him, and he'd just stand there telling me what he was doing, what he was thinking, what he was looking for in the horses. So, yeah, he's another one.
Great storyteller, and obviously got that family has got a vast knowledge of the racing game.
Yes, very much so. And he's a very, very funny man.
Extremely. I used to love him on the Big Sports Breakfast when he used to get the narc on there and so forth, and they'd go toe-to-toe. It was very funny.
It's actually funny you mention the track work. I used to work at a newspaper, and one of the journos there, he was a racing rider, and he'd been there forever and a day. And he'd do the same thing. He'd go out before he even come into the office at the newspaper there, he'd go out to Randwick or Rosehill or wherever in the mornings at 4 a.m. looking at the track work and stuff like that. So it's quite amazing the amount
Doing his homework.
doing the homework and things that way. So on another front, there's obviously a lot of competition between Victorian racing and Sydney racing, and Victoria's obviously got the Melbourne Cup and the Caulfield Cup and things like that, and Sydney with the building up the Everest. What are your thoughts on this racing between the two cities or states?
Yeah, it certainly makes headlines, especially in particular the touring court. But for me, I come from the opinion that I think Peter Blandys has done amazing things for racing in New South Wales.
It's one of the greats.
He has put that on the map. And for me, a perfect example for that was when the Everest was first launched. And my mum, who, as I said at the start of the show, doesn't follow racing at all, and she told me what horse she was going to be backing in the Everest. And I remember saying to Peter, that was for me a massive win, because someone who doesn't follow racing at all knew what horse she was going to back in the race. And I remember thinking, okay, they've done the right thing, because they're getting people that aren't your normal race goers interested in the sport, which I think is fantastic, because you need to make this sport as viable and interesting as possible to people that aren't just already in the industry. And now that I've come to Victoria, they're also doing a really great job here. It's very different. I don't think either is better or worse. They're just so different, but they're so successful as well.
Yeah.
I've done a lot with the VRC, and I think that they are such a well-oiled machine, and they pull together, like the Spring Racing Carnival is just next level. When I worked at the AJC, I remember we got sent there to be able to go and see what they all did and how we could then try and emulate that at Randwick. And I must say the current crop of marketing and events at the AJC or ATC, sorry, have certainly done that. Like our Everest meeting and all of that is right on par with all of that.
Yeah.
So for me, I just think obviously the stories are in the press about the codes not getting along, but whatever we can do to make people love racing as much as we do, I know there's like the three of us sitting here talking about it, as long as we can get other people interested, that's what matters in my mind, is just to make sure that we can get as many people involved in the sport. And I think that we're doing a good job at that so far.
I've been lucky enough to go to the Everest, and for those non-race goers, I'm a race fan, obviously, but if you haven't been, do yourself a favour, Molly Meldrum, if you haven't been to the Everest in Sydney, you've got to go and do it. It is absolutely outstanding day.
You mentioned there the people not knowing the races, like Melbourne Cup. That's the only race if you don't have a bet, but you have a bet on the Melbourne Cup, and I know here at work we'll have a sweep and a bit of a get together to watch the Melbourne Cup. I think that's what Sydney needs to do, and you said that they're stepping in the right direction to get people that aren't usually race goers to go to the races, and show an interest certainly in that sense. And it can only be good for the sport. Who knows if they don't go, they go this time, and then okay, well there's another event on, and it's Wednesday night, and there's more people than bins then, so which turns it around. Yeah,
well, I worked at the rapid racing at Flemington just a few weeks ago, and I thought that was such a great concept. The races were 30 minutes apart. It was really quick. We're only there for 3 hours. It was a Friday afternoon. You finish work, stroll on down to the track and watch the races, and whether that's an idea moving forward for other tracks to follow suit, but just ideas.
It's a bit like Canterbury Park, on a Friday night. That's a good twilight meeting. You go to it. They're short in between races, and it's good fun. Exactly. It's good family fun. You say there with your Peter V'landys, he is doing some tremendous work, and he's obviously targeted the right sort of people. He's looking at the younger bracket coming along with and made it as a party venue.
Well, he has, and then they've also done things like the Golden Eagle, for example, how it's got that charity component. So a section of the prize money goes back to charity, and I think that also resonates with a lot of people too, so that they know that the racing industry is also giving back. I think that was a really good initiative too. So if we can keep doing these things that draw attention and draw people to come to the races, we're doing a great thing.
Yeah, good, for sure. Now, to finish up the podcast, we ask our Fast 5 questions, and it's just rapid fire to get to know you a little bit better, Jaimee. What would be your last meal?
My last meal would be something like seafoody. I love seafood. So whether it be like a lobster or a salt and pepper calamari, but something in that seafood bracket. Prawns that I don't have to peel. They're already peeled for me.
Sounds like my wife. Good choice. Yeah.
Your drink of choice.
My drink of choice.
Apart from salt water.
Yeah, apart from the salt water. At this point in time, because it's like summery, it would be an Aperol Spritz.
Nice.
Very nice.
Refreshing.
What is one of your weird quirks?
A weird quirk. I bite my fingernails, so that's probably
Is that one of my weird quirks
Well,
too?
I'm the same then, if that's the case.
Yeah.
Your favourite movie quote?
Favorite movie quote. I have heaps. It depends on what angle we're taking. If you want like the inspiring movie quotes, then mine definitely comes from the Coach Carter. Something like our deepest fear is that we're not inadequate, it's that we're too good. That Coach Carter line, and probably also, I don't know if you guys have seen 10 Things I Hate About You, but Heath Ledger said something really cool about don't let anyone ever believe that you're not good enough to go and get that life that you want.
Just on the movies, and sitting here talking to you, Jaimee, we've got you on the screen. If someone was to play you in a movie, there's I think she's Canadian, but she's on English TV. Her name is Catherine Ryan. You are her doppelganger. If you have a look at Catherine Ryan, dead set. Catherine Ryan
there you go.
Is, you could be twins.
Straight on Instagram. Let's have a look at that.
Yes.
So I'll have to have a look at that.
And finally, I'm not too sure if you are aware, Heaven has had a bit of a makeover recently, a renovation. Scotty Cam's been up there and knocking out walls and putting stuff in. And they've actually changed the pearly gates to the pearly KRGS roller shutter. So if Heaven does exist, what would God say when you arrive at the KRGS pearly roller shutter?
He'll say, you are right on time because I am never late for anything in my life.
There you go.
Good.
Jaimee Rogers, you are an absolute star. I really appreciate you coming on and having a chat with us, telling us the Jaimee Rogers story, right from the swimming and a chance to go to the Olympics to obviously the peak of swimming the English Channel. It's a feather in your cap, and congratulations. Love what you're doing in the media and the radio and all your other media commitments. You're doing a fantastic job. Really, really appreciate coming on and having a chat.
No, thanks so much for having me. You guys have done a great job. You've got a good podcast here.
That wraps up episode 44 and our chat with Jaimee Rogers. What an inspiration. You can see Jaimee on Sky Racing as well as follow her on Instagram and Twitter. If you have missed any previous episodes of the KRGS Doors podcast, you can download them from our website, www.krgsdoors.com.au/podcasts, or on your favourite podcast player, search KRGS Doors. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. This also boosts our ranking and my ego. The other thing I suggest, if you have enjoyed the podcast, visit your favourite podcast player and leave a review or a rating. On our next episode, we speak to Damien Brand from Fine Concept Shop Fitting in South Australia. We talk all things shop fitting as well as business and also his love of cars. Keep your ears peeled for this chat, which is not to be missed. I've been your host, Drew Blackman, and you've been fantastic for tuning in today. As always, you could be anywhere in the world, but you're here with us. Thanks. Till next time. The KRGS Doors Show, proudly brought to you by KRGS Doors. For all your shopfront roller shutters, roller grills, folding closures and bifold doors, visit www.krgsdoors.com.au.